Welcome to your in-depth monthly astrology overview and zodiac forecast for May 2025. I'm going to share some standout details with you to begin with. Then on screen, the event chart right at the start of the month. That always provides some influential insights for what we can expect. I'll go through all the developing influences frame by frame to give you a really clear picture of what we can all collectively expect. But then I'll go through each of the 12 zodiac signs in detail from Aries through to Pisces. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. A warm welcome. Your views and interactions are truly appreciated. If you've yet to subscribe to the channel, please help it thrive and do so now, but also click or tap the bell notification symbol. I've launched a new free natal horoscope report. Now, you can get your big three from this in terms of your ascendant, sun, or the moon, but also you can find out where your other planetary players are located by sign, but also house, but equally the relationships between all of these players. It's absolutely brilliant. Please see below for more. You can download it in a trice. You can also sign up through my new website for your 3 daily written horoscope, fired to your device each morning. We have refined that as well. Each day you get an overview of the key astrological influence. So that gives us the big picture, as well as you can enjoy your zodiac forecast as well. Please see below for more. I'm a consultant astrologer. I love working directly with clients. Please check out my testimonials below. I've also got a new service, astrology video readings, which have proved incredibly popular. They are less expensive than a one-to-one, but it gives you an opportunity to work with me in terms of your moving information and provide a lot of insights, and it's great value for money. Please see below for more. As ever, I have my permanent special offer on your personal horoscope reports, 30% off. Please see below for more on them, and you can choose them in whole sign, draconic, solar if you don't know your time, or Placidus format if you do. Again, please see below for more. Well, this month begins with the sun in the sign of Taurus, but we do have 3 players in the sign of Aries, and that's Mercury, Venus, and the newly arrived Neptune, which joined up in the sign of Aries as last month came to a close. But we are going to have Saturn arriving for the first time since 1999 on the 25th of this month. That's really, really important. Going to be there through to the end of August. And we're also going to see Pluto, the planet of transformation, which is in its 3rd journey through Aquarius, slam on the brakes for its annual 5-month retrograde, which begins on the 4th. On the 5th, Venus leaves its post-retrograde shadow. So that's good news. We are going to see a powerful full moon on the 12th. Uranus, the planet that can shake things up, is right in the mix. So I need to unpack that for you. But we do also have a very powerful conjunction between the Sun and Uranus in week 3. So a degree of unpredictability around the financial markets is likely to continue to be in place. We're then going to see a big energy developing in the sign of Gemini, not least with the Sun's arrival on the 20th, but also we're going to see a arrival of Mercury, the ruler of the sign, on the 26th, and Mercury is going to be very close to the Gemini new moon of the 27th, which equally arcs towards the position of Pluto, but also Neptune as well, because in the last 10 days of this month, Neptune and Pluto are within 3 degrees, so the influence that they bring is amped up. Then, as the month comes to a close, we have a Mercury retrograde, but it's a particularly powerful one because Mercury is in one of its 2 home signs. And in Gemini, it's very quick, very fast, very nimble, very agile. So we're going to see some speeding up around all sorts of events as this month draws to a close. So on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the month. As ever, we need to be mindful of the two luminaries. So you can see the sun's at 10 degrees and 52 minutes. So it's just moved out of the first decan of the sign of Taurus, which is sub-ruled by the overall ruler of the sign of Venus. So it's now got more of a Mercury influence. So we're thinking about how we can make the most of our resources, how we might be a little more thrifty, and just be conscious of some of the challenges that we're having to deal with. But you can also see the moon, the other luminary, which lights up the night, the sun, the day, is very, very close to Jupiter in the sign of Gemini. So that's a very bubbly influence at the start of this month, which could elevate our moods somewhat. But that moon is in a square with Saturn. So it's important to still be mindful of, as much as there's a lot of white noise, particularly in social media, around different activities in life, it can have an impact on our emotional welfare, and that's still something to be mindful of at the start of the month. But equally, you can also see that Mars, the planet, which is very much to do with assertion, in the sign of Leo, where it can be very prideful, is in an opposition with Pluto. That's very, very testing. What we can get with that is where people want to be very dominant, especially with Mars in Leo. Pluto, however, is very much about true power, but it's not necessarily power we can see. It can be the revealer, but it can, of course, work in a much more leveraged, out of sight way. So that's very potent. So I think the big takeouts as we go into this new month are Mars and Pluto in an opposition, a bubbly conjunction between the moon and Jupiter, but one that we can't get too caught up in because of the role of the North Node and Saturn squaring up to them, and therefore being in touch with the more psychological domain, really important. The other one to be mindful of is Venus's conjunction with Neptune. Venus, back in the sign of Aries on the first day of this month, is going to emerge from its shadow on the 5th. But of course, Venus is detrimented in Aries, and Neptune in Aries is so newly arrived. What do we make of this combination? Well, I feel if you're a creative person, you could be absolutely inspired as they join together. They're exactly in conjunction on the 2nd. However, when it comes to relationships, if we think that Neptune and Venus rules the opposite sign of Libra from Aries, together can create some real mystique around relationships, but they could create some distortion. So if there's someone who's really capturing your imagination, particularly with that very intense opposition between Mars and Pluto, you could be aware of someone with a very mesmeric energy, which is hard to resist. But equally, the combination with Venus and Neptune means there may be something about them that's not obvious and may not actually be what you really want. So just be conscious of that. But as I mentioned, Pluto does go into the retrograde at 3 degrees and 49. It's going to invert back to 1 degrees and 22 by the 14th of October, so about 2¼ degrees. Pluto will retain its huge influence over us all, however, because of the angle that it forges later this month with Neptune. And as we go into June, it will link with Saturn in a much more accurate sextile. But it is going to be there from the 25th of the month when Saturn pitches up in Aries too. Venus emerges, as I mentioned before, on the 5th from her shadow period. If you have gone through some tough times, maybe around a relationship matter, maybe around finances, with Venus going into Aries, then reversing back into the the sign of Pisces, but being in contact in a very challenging way all of April with Saturn. This is an opportunity to get on the front foot, to draw a line in the sand. Also, Mercury speeds out of the sign of initiative, Aries, on the 10th and arrives in Taurus. So Mercury in Taurus, very businesslike, very practical, but it is going to immediately square up with Pluto. We could encounter someone over the next couple of days who's got a bit of a might is right attitude when it comes to their ideas or their philosophies or the way they articulate them. On the 12th, we have that Scorpio full moon. Scorpio full moons are very intense. The moon in Scorpio is in its full. It's not its greatest location, but also the position of Uranus on the other side of the heavens is very close to the sun. So over the following couple of weeks, I feel that things can be very intense, particularly over anything we share or anything we're attached to. That could be money, could be our possessions, could be a rather possessive relationship that we need to think carefully about whether it really is good for us. And because Uranus is in the mix, that can be very provocative, but it also can push us to escape from something that's not really working. The sun goes on, as I mentioned before, right through week 3 in a very tight conjunction with Uranus, but then we're also going to have Mercury aligning with Uranus too, and that's going to equally from the 23rd to the 26th just put us a little bit more on edge, but it could also make us a lot more spontaneous about spending money and being a little bit more impulsive. But on the 20th, the sun moves into the sign of Gemini, where it's going to speed things up in quite a noticeable way. When the move of Saturn into Aries occurs on the 25th, the sun is angling back to Saturn in a very constructive way. So our ideas and the way we initiate the structure of them, Saturn in Aries, which again, like the moon in Scorpio with the full moon, is in its full, I feel that as we take that Saturn energy to us, we can just be as realistic as possible. It's all very well racing into new opportunities, but we need to do the planning, we need to do the research. And I feel that Saturn will therefore be a good anchor for the speed in sun as it moves into Gemini, where it wants to escape some of that heavy stuff, that heavy weather that it's experienced with Uranus. But on the 26th, we get a real asset because Mercury moves into one of its 2 home signs, but it too is going to be linking very productively to Saturn, but also to Pluto. So what we're thinking about, what's being discussed, can be much more constructive, I feel, towards the end of this month. In fact, the new moon, which occurs on the 27th, also aligns with Neptune and Pluto being within 3 degrees in their sextile. Now, of course, for many, many years, they've been in the sextile between the signs of Capricorn and Pisces. So this is a new epoch that we're going into. Pluto can be what influences us all. Can, of course, be the power broker, as I mentioned before. It can also deconstruct, and we have seen in April how Pluto can be so challenging in some ways, but it also gives us the opportunity to rebuild, so it can be a phoenix-like energy. So I feel the discussions we're having collectively, perhaps even with world leaders towards the end of this month, can be far more optimistic than what we've been experiencing in the month of April, which has been phenomenally challenging. What I would say, as we come to the end of the month, Mercury is in that new moon of the 27th, which links to Pluto and Saturn, but then we have a cazimi on the 30th. Mercury cazimis is where the Sun and Mercury are absolutely unified. What the Sun does, and particularly in the sign of Gemini, is pours its energy into the qualities of Mercury and amplifies it. So if you're starting a new project at the end of this month, or you have a new birth in your family, the chances are that person is going to, or that entity will have a liveliness about them, which always will be a big part of their identity. Just to tell you, however, that all this month, Jupiter is in a square with the node. We saw that right at the start of the month with the combination of the moon and Jupiter squaring up with the node and Saturn. So I would just say that whatever is discussed, we keep needing to try to deconstruct what the meaning is for us, the emotional meaning and the energetic exchange, and not necessarily be guided too much by the news headlines or what we're reading online. So if we need at times moments of peace, tranquility and quiet to just distill ourselves away from the intensity of it all, I feel that that's going to be a very shrewd thing to do. But finances will be at the heart of this month's story, I feel. But the shakeout that we've been going through, I feel we're going to get much more consensus. We're going to get things moving. I feel that there's hopefully going to be a much greater sense of integration, because essentially we can think about ourselves in terms of our individuality or the country that we live in, but we are part of the whole piece, aren't we? We're just a small fragment of how it all fits together, and if we're all fitting together in a bit more of a cohesive way, it's better for every one of us. And also for all of us this month, one of the most sensational influences starts on the 11th, goes on to the 30th, and it's a sextile which is very enabling between Venus, the relator, but also the money planet, and the passionate energies of Mars in the aforementioned proud Leo. Now this is charisma central, because Venus in Aries takes action to go for what it desires, and Mars in Leo certainly has the confidence to take that action forward. So whether it's in terms of showcasing our talents, our creativity, our flair, linking more playfully with others, or feeling good about our personal appearance, or changing our personal appearance in some kind of dazzling way, or making some key love moves as they peak in that sextile on the 22nd of the month. That can be a very, very positive time for many people indeed. Thank you so much for listening to that overview. Please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. Welcome Aries to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. As you burst into this new month, you have a new arrival in your sign in the guise of Venus. But of course Venus was with you before starting her retrograde, so it's great to have her back, but she's also aligning with Neptune through the first week of this new month and in a perfect alliance on the second. And Neptune, newly arrived, is an opportunity for you to really embrace the more creative, spiritual, but also passionate ideas that you have. Venus isn't just about relating, and it isn't just about money. It's also about how we shape perceptions. That can be through our tastes. It can also be through our fashion choices, how we decorate our homes. So the combination between the two can be exquisite. If you're lucky enough to be meeting someone new at the start of this month and you just seem to chime in an atmospheric way, it could be a relationship that has real potential. But of course Venus in your sign is known as being technically in its detriment. I want you to put that to one side. What Venus in Aries is going to give you is an opportunity to initiate. Sometimes if we want things in life, whether we set our intentions, whether we actually take a physical move forwards, we are actually taking charge. Venus is about desire. So if there's something you desire, whether it is a new tasteful item for your home, or you'd like to get to know someone new, or you'd like to showcase a talent you have, this is a fine time for you to initiate it. Now, of course, we do have, right at the start of this month, your ruler Mars in a big opposition with Pluto. Pluto retains its location for you in your sector of friendships, but also your long-term plan. And if there are people in your social circle that you feel that are challenging at times, but you can in some ways through that competition evolve and grow, those can be people that are very much worth keeping at the heart of your situation. However, the converse sadly could be true. So some kind of standoff may occur this month. It might be in your romantic situation if what your current partner wants is different to you. And maybe because of Venus's conjunction to Neptune, you could find yourself feeling that much more sensitive, but at the same time, that much more assertive too, which is a very interesting combination. But also at the start of this month, the Moon and Jupiter are kind of giving you a sense that if you're bubbly and outgoing, that can go somewhere good. And it can. Just be conscious that they do clash with Saturn and the North Node. So whatever you're thinking about, whatever you're discussing, how you're trying to connect to people within your everyday world or community or locality, that's very much the third house. Just be aware of what your deeper motivations are, but also stay conscious of what the motivations of other people can be too. Now, Venus ends its post-retrograde shadow on the 5th. I think that's something you're going to appreciate, to be honest. And because of Venus coming out of its shadow, it's going to just free things up. But also, if you have been very active in terms of trying to initiate some kind of new plan or inject an ongoing one with greater spark and enthusiasm, the arrival of Mercury from your sign into Taurus on the 10th is asking you to try to evaluate what you're gaining in a practical way, because it's an earth sign. It's just that that clashes straight away with that opposition between Mars and Pluto. So if there is some tension between what you want from your future and how you're going to get there, it could come up, and it's possible that you could have some kind of discussion that needs to play out around a financial matter. All of this will come up to the boil on the intense Scorpio full moon of the 12th. For the following 2 weeks, if what you're contributing to a situation, even if you're not expecting a quid pro quo back, you're just wanting someone to show the same amount of investment emotionally, if nothing else. If you're not seeing that matched, the chances are, with Uranus being so close to it, to the position of the sun and opposite the moon, there's part of you that will want to separate from something that you don't really feel you're properly connected to anymore. Moon opposite Uranus can require a personal need for individual space. The sun is going to be in a conjunction with Uranus right through week 3. Now, this could push you to be a little bit more inclined to splash out on something that takes your fancy. It can also push you to be much more open to new ways of earning money. And in that sense, the combination between the Sun and Uranus can be a very big asset to you. But right through this month, from the 11th through to the 30th, Mars, your ruler, is forging a stunning alliance with Venus. Now that's going to reach a peak on the 22nd. So if you are wanting to bring some new energy into your social world, how you present yourself, or even in terms of your love moves, that's very exciting and very energizing. So don't get too caught up on anyone saying that Venus is in detriment in your sign. The 20th, however, is a great opportunity to put your foot to the floor. If you are wanting to physically move around more, be more active, perhaps a little bit more playful, learn a new course, share ideas you've got with other people, consider a new mode of transport, sharpen up your ideas, perhaps publish a blog. If you're already in the digital sphere, you can be inspired through the last third of this month. Not least, on the 25th of this month, Saturn, stern Saturn, arrives in your sign for the first time since 1999. To be honest, Aries, I feel that as Saturn has been in your 12th house for the last couple of years, it's not been easy. It is going to go back into your 12th house at the end of August, the start of September the 1st, but it will move back into Aries early next year. It just depends exactly where your planets or positions are in the sign of Aries, and also if you do have some trailing influences in Pisces. But you may have felt at times the last couple of years has felt a little bit like trudging through glue, because as much as the solar eclipse series and the nodal axis being in Aries was encouraging you to seize the moment in terms of your individual talents and unique personality and showcasing your charisma, somehow or another, some kind of issue from the past, whether it's your fear, your anxieties, old hurts, someone who you were attached to, and the pain that may have been caused by any kind of separation, those kind of issues may have in some ways been splitting your attention. What Saturn in your 12th house may have allowed you to do, however, in a very successful way, is wind up something that's no longer working, or just bring into a natural conclusion something that you may have began around about 29.5 years ago, or 7 1/3 years ago, or maybe about 14.5 years ago, because those are all Saturn staging points. But on the 26th, Mercury darts into the sign of Gemini. Can be particularly mischievous here, but also particularly brilliant. Your ideas can really start to bubble. You may find that despite Saturn asking you to measure your energy carefully through to the end of August, that there's going to be lots of opportunities to connect with other people, and some of those connections could prove to be very significant, not least with the new moon in Gemini having Mercury so close to it, but they're both linking to both Pluto and Saturn. This is truly historic. It's never happened before. We've also got Neptune and Pluto in a great sextile within 3 degrees. It's about 2 degrees through the last 10 days of this month. So the things that you feel passionately about, whether it's about your causes, your friendships, your long-term plan, or how you're actually going to achieve those through the steps you'll take through your thinking, communication, but also the planning at the heart of your world with Saturn, that gets a great chance to shine up. And of course, with the Mercury Cazimi, if you have got something bubbly and effervescent to say, everybody's going to know about it as this month draws to a close. But I think that angle between Venus and Mars right through this month is absolutely fabulous for you. So whether it is you strutting your stuff in a more confident way, you know, if you are in the northern hemisphere and the weather's improving, the chances are you're going to want to get out and engage with other people more. Remember, you're an initiator. It's just that with Mars in opposition with Pluto, there may be something that has to be broken away from in order for you to clear the path to really seize the golden prize that's out there for you. But I feel that you can. I feel it's there for you. This is a new epoch. It just comes in 2 phases. This is phase 1 with Saturn with you for the first time. It is technically in its full. The rationale there is that your sign is the first zodiac sign, so therefore it's the start of the zodiacal journey, the procession of the animals, which is based symbolically on the constellations in Western tropical astrology, not the moving constellations as in sidereal or Vedic. So what you have here is Saturn, which can be about resistance, limitation, patience, combines with your sign, which is very much about cracking on with it with a sense of bravado and listening to your instincts and getting on the front foot. But if you get a balance between the both of the energies, what a huge opportunity this month represents for you. I hope you have a great May, Aries. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big 3, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome Taurus, in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. As you come into this new month, your ruler Venus returns to a very spiritual part of your situation and merges with the mesmeric energies of Neptune through the first week. You may find yourself very, very nostalgic at the very start of May. You also could find yourself very sensitive. When the sun is in our sign, it's usually a time of initiation and action, but you may find yourself pausing around certain strands because you want to try to understand what they truly mean. And that could be as much about a relationship matter as much as something more practical. Now, if you are a very creative or artistic Taurus, you could find yourself in absolutely top form right at the start of May. But if you're not so sure about what you want to do in terms of your professional situation, the fact that Mars and Pluto are in a strident standoff as the month begins suggests if there's any politics at work, there's a culture where you feel a little bit unsure that you can express yourself, your sensitivity can be drawing that all in and soaking it up like a sponge. But the converse can be true. Your ability to sense into situations can be such a guide in terms of the moves you make. But if you are unsure about an emotional or personal relationship, that combination between Neptune and Venus could see you either very nostalgic or somewhat confused. Fortunately, Venus ends its post-retrograde shadow on the 5th, but Pluto in your sector of success does slam on the brakes, and that's going to be retracing its steps through to the middle of October. If you're not very fulfilled around your professional situation, you could find yourself pulled towards something that has much more of a psychological quality to it, such as working in a support role, perhaps in healthcare. Maybe also if you're a psychic, you're going to feel absolutely inspired as you come into this new month. But just know that your ruler Venus is going to forge a very strong link with Mars from the 11th through to the 30th, which will peak on the 22nd. But Mars back in your 4th house from the start of May could just see you a little bit impatient if things aren't rattling along quite at the pace you would like. Now, what's going to help you is the arrival on the 10th of Mercury in your sign. But just be aware for a couple of days, if you do want to tell someone how you feel, do a proposal, you're doing a presentation, you need to meet key people, there could be a lot of tension that's around that event. Now, the full moon, which occurs on the 12th, is when the moon is opposite your sun position. So for you, you may experience over the following couple of weeks someone saying that you're far too single-minded on what's important to you, and you've lost a little bit of awareness of where they are. Now, you may feel that that's not true at all, but because Uranus is so close to your sun, particularly through week 3, the chances are you will need a certain amount of personal space. Or there's part of you that wants to be much more daring and individualistic, particularly creatively. So if you are in a job which does seem very top down in terms of the structure, the philosophies, it's all a bit rigid, that could be something that you start to struggle with at the heart of this month. That said, if you're working in a very productive way on new ideas through the first 2/3 of this month, you can start to see the foundations build up in a more substantive way from the 20th. But Saturn then arrives for its first visit in your 12th house, and that's going to begin on the 25th and goes through to the end of August. Saturn hasn't been in your 12th house since 1999. This first visit is actually going to be supported in a very constructive way. For example, Saturn links brilliantly with the Sun, newly arrived in Gemini. It also links very well with Pluto in your sector of success. Therefore, with Saturn in your 12th house, and particularly with the merging of Neptune and Venus at the start of the month, you could start to think or reconnect to someone from your past. Maybe it was experiences that you had. It's possible that old knowledge could be repackaged in a new way as you move into the last phase of this month. So if you are looking for a change at work, that's not to say that what you used to do can't still be valuable now. It's just that the way you use it may be somewhat different. Now, Mercury then moves into your second house on the 26th of the month. That's going to see a speeding up in terms of your thinking. But the new moon on the 27th also is pretty close to Mercury, but angles back positively to Saturn, but also to Pluto. So as the month comes to a close, I feel you are going to gain some clarity about what's important to you in terms of your values, but also finances. And because of that link between Venus and Mars that goes on all through this month, if there is a talent that you've had that has been in some ways on the back burner, it could come much more into the picture as May comes to a close. But any confusion that you may be experiencing around relationship matters, I feel by the end of the month you want to know where you stand. You want to define things in a much more practical way. But if it's money that's your main focus, the chances are that you can start to turn things around in a very much more constructive way as the month comes to a close. Have a great month, Taurus. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome Gemini to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. We need to be mindful of the position of your ruler at the start of this month, and Mercury is still in a very bubbly, friendly part of your chart, but it's joined by Venus, the relator, as it returns to the sign of Aries on the first day and meshes in a quite mesmeric way to Neptune. Through the first week, you could feel quite nostalgic, and particularly as the sun does continue a more muted location, perhaps you will feel sentimental too, and that points towards that collective in your 11th house of sociability and friendships, of connecting to like-minded people. But it could be that you have a meetup linked to a creative or artistic or philosophical interest that you have. But right at the start of this month, the moon is in your sign, very close to Jupiter, but they're both squared off by Saturn, and that energy is something to be mindful of as a backdrop for the whole month, particularly as Mars is in your third house. Now, the third house is redolent of the energies of Gemini, but Mars in Leo is very proud and can be loud. So there may be something you want to discuss at the start of this month, as Mars is in opposition with Pluto, that you feel very strongly about. And it could be coming from an instinct because of the Sun broadly T-squaring them in your 12th house. So if you do stand up a particular viewpoint, particularly with the sensitivity of Venus and Neptune, which could be a little distorted, you need to make sure you've absolutely nailed your facts. Also, Jupiter in your sign is not only starting this month, inching closer back to a square to Saturn, which began, first of all, within 3 degrees last July. It hasn't been ongoing within 3 degrees for a while, but as Jupiter comes to the end of its journey through your sign, they are inching back towards that tension. And also in the mix is the North Node. So when it comes to your claims or your beliefs, or the things you feel very assured and positive and confident about, Jupiter in your own sign, when it comes to your professional situation, do ensure that you are absolutely clear on what you want to achieve and who you want to influence. Now, as Venus makes its way further into the sign of Aries, it reconnects with Pluto. Now, Pluto, in that opposition with Mars, very, very powerful, starts a retrograde on the 4th, which goes on through to the middle of October. But this is a repetition. There may be someone, perhaps it's someone you're reconnecting to, who really just seems to have some kind of energy that you find very evocative, but perhaps quite hard to resist. But I feel that Pluto's retrograde through the next 5 months in the sign of Aquarius, your sister air sign, is actually not as potentially challenging as it could be. Because later this month, of course, Saturn arrives in your friendship sector and the part of your scope to do with your long-term plan, but Pluto aligns with that constructively. It's aligning with Neptune through the last 10 days of this month, constructively, within 3 degrees. And then when Uranus pitches up in your sign on the 7th of July through to the 7th of October, that too is when Pluto is going to be influential. So although it is in retrograde and Pluto can be the revealer, the 9th house can be about contracts, it can be about publishing, it can also be about the law, but it can be about philosophies and travel. So all of those areas could be those that really evolve for you in a constructive way. But on the 5th, Venus emerges from its shadow. When Venus went direct on the 13th of April, it was shadowed by the strict energies of Saturn. In fact, right through April, and again on the 25th of the month, there was an exact conjunction between the two. So as Venus returns to Aries and picks up speed from the 5th, that's something to really savour, because Gemini, by the 11th, Venus starts to forge a stunning angle to Mars, one which goes on right to the end of the month within 3 degrees. In fact, they peak in an exact cooperative arrangement on the 22nd. So Venus in your 11th house and Mars in your 3rd house, which is chatty, interactive, but also could give you the urge to be more physically active. It suggests that you're going to have a potentially quite social time, or will you? Because on the 10th, Mercury, your ruler, pitches into the tender 12th house, but it also clashes brutally with Pluto. And Mercury is also going to come into a conjunction later on in the month with Uranus. And in fact, on the full moon of the 12th, it's Uranus that's very close to the Sun in a very psychological part of your scope. The moon on the other side of the heavens, very intense in Scorpio, in its fall, is suggesting that if something practically or emotionally and spiritually is out of kilter in your world, it may be that something will just come into the open very, very quickly, which could be very disruptive. Now, in terms of our overall experience, Uranus applying to the Sun over week 3 can see unsettled conditions around finance. For you, it could be much more psychological. You may feel irritable. There could be some old issues that just seem to come up from nowhere. And despite the value of Venus and Mars, the two planets of passion and desire, collaborating, if you're in a relationship which isn't working for you, I feel one of the things you might want to do is break free. So a weak tie could still be a little bit affected despite the value of Venus and Mars in that glittering alliance. But it's all to go for on the 20th, Gemini, because the Sun returns to your sign for the first time in 11 months. But not just that. the Sun then forges a stunning angle to Pluto. So one of astrology's most powerful associations, because the Sun in your sign brings you into the present, which is very, very welcome. Of course, you have Jupiter there as well. But Mercury is going to be joining up with the Sun on the 26th. But just be aware, between that period of the Sun's arrival and Mercury catching up, things can still be restless because Mercury is so close to Uranus. That said, we have on the 25th, Saturn returning to the sign of Aries for the first time since 1999. It's just going to be for 3 months and 7 days, so to the end of August, by the 1st of September, back into the sign of Pisces through a retrograde. But on the 27th, the new moon in your sign is also embracing your ruler Mercury. And that really brings some glittering magic to bear, I feel. And Saturn moving into your 11th house just suggests if there have been some disappointments through this month in terms of people's trustworthiness, loyalty, or honesty because of the 12th house energy, and especially through the full moon and the position of your ruler aligning to Uranus, because Uranus is an electric energy, but essentially Uranus is a truth seeker. It can be very outspoken. It's possible that someone's going to confront you with a side of yourself that you're not ready to hear, because in the 12th house, that's what can happen. People could make a judgment or a comment on you, and you need to be prepared for that. But the potential to use the power of Venus and Mars, the sheer charisma of that, if you don't have things that are out of balance in your situation, you're in touch with your emotional world, you're clear about some of your maybe vulnerabilities, and you're okay with them, you're not a little bit distant from them. Uranus can be about distance. I feel that you can embrace that Venus sextile with Mars in a much more successful way. So when we reach the last 10 days of this month, what Saturn can do in your 11th house, even though Saturn is technically in a full in Aries, is just see you getting very clear and determined about some of your long-term plans. But if there are any weak associations or friendships, they are going to be teased out this month, I feel, because of that 12th house energy, then Saturn aligning or alighting in your 11th house. Now, the month ends with a gorgeous link between Neptune and Pluto. Again, they're there from the start of the month. It's just there within 3 degrees. I feel that 3 degrees is very important in terms of the orb, the orbit, because it's much more powerful. So for you, because Pluto is in retrograde in the 9th house, and Neptune is in inspirational and passionate form in your 11th house, you could be surprised about some of the people who do come into your world, even if there are some older faces that are being shook out, and perhaps in quite bruising and unexpected ways because of the disruptive potential of Uranus. But the month ends with a crowning moment, literally. The sun places his heat upon your head with a cazimi, but also it's a superior cazimi because Mercury's not retrograde. And what a cazimi is the position of Mercury is embedded right at the heart of the sun as we see it from Earth. So that provides a glow up. So the magnificence, the power, the sheer raw resources of the sun is giving you the potential to use what is quite your talent, your mind, your quick wits, your mercurial swiftness, where you can be very dexterous, but also it can be very bubbly, it can be cheeky, it can be fun. So right at the end of this month, you could feel absolutely inspired, particularly if you've got new ideas that are very exciting, if you're connecting with fresh faces that are giving you a sense of uplift, or you're someone with a story or information you want to share. So if you're a teacher or a trainer, a marketeer, a blogger, someone who enjoys using social media, you could be on absolutely top form as you come to the end of this month. But essentially, if you're someone who is a little bit reluctant to look at your shadow side, the heart of this month is really asking you to embrace it, not judge it. Just accept that we all have parts of our nature that are more challenging to accept. But if you can accept some of your sensitivities, that frees up your energy to focus on being more practically productive on the back of the Scorpio full moon. But as the month draws to a close, the potential for social interaction with that Venus sextile to Mars and all that glorious Gemini energy as the cosmic curtain comes down is absolutely fantastic. Have a great month, Gemini. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome, Cancer, to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. If we go back to the beginning of last September, the thrust-in energies of Mars arrived in your sign on the 5th. Mars was with you through to the first week of November before moving into Leo, but it returned back to your sign on the 6th of January and was with you through to the 18th of April. But when Mars returned back to Leo then, it once more clashed with Pluto. Now for you, Mars in Leo is the second house, which is where we can be attached to things. It can be, of course, where we could be very proud because Mars in Leo has precisely that energy. But Pluto on the other side of the heavens is very much to do with transformation, but it can also be where we're most invested. So as you start this month, the energy that started to get highly charged right at the heart of April and made you think more about not so much what you're earning or your shared resources, but more how you went about it and was it something you truly enjoyed. And the reason for that was the activity in your sister water sign of Pisces, because Saturn in that location was very influential as it connected with a series of other players, not least Venus, the money planet, but also the relator. Now, as you start this month, Venus has finally left Pisces, returned to Aries, and is right at the top of your chart, but forging an inspirational link with Neptune for the first time in all of our lifetimes in the sign of Aries. But for you, that's your connection to the world. Now, this can be a very idealistic combination. You also have Mercury in the sign of Aries, which can be very constructive. Mercury is terrific for business. It's very much about communicating messages, being analytical, and in the 10th house maybe has seen you think about some training or how your ideas can reach a wider audience. Now the Sun, on the other hand, starts this month in a very idealistic part of your scope, but one that's very much to do about your long-term plan. So what I feel the opposition which continues between Mars and Pluto as you come into this month, and Pluto's retrograde on the 4th, and it's linked to Venus as it advances into the sign of Aries, is going to see you think very carefully about what your professional situation is and whether it actually does give you that sense of inspiration and truer meaning that's really important for you. And if it doesn't, you could have some very big decisions to make this month. And the reason for that, Cancer, is that Jupiter, the planet of hope and faith, particularly in the 12th house as it is for you, starts this month in a conjunction with your ruler, but that's the hidden part of your chart. But they're both challenged by Saturn and the North Node, and so that part of you that may feel penned in by corporate responsibilities, maybe looking after elderly parents, maybe it's your kids. If you don't feel there's much flexibility in your life and you feel you're under a lot of duress and strain, that may be something you're reviewing, despite if changing things did have some kind of financial impact. So as Venus comes out of shadow on the 5th, and Mercury moves into the part of your scope to do with your longer term plan on the 10th, but itself gets caught up in a T-square with Mars, but also with Pluto. You could find yourself having some conversations with friends that you can trust about the reality of your situation. All of this reaches a potent peak on the 12th with an intense full moon in your sister water sign of Scorpio. Now Scorpio is where the moon is in her fall, and it's not therefore the best location, but on the other side of the heavens is the sun in the friendly 11th house, but very close to Uranus. And over the following week of right through to the end of week 3, you could find yourself feeling very restless indeed, particularly if that sense of constriction is very strong for you, and you may be consciously considering what your options could be. But as Venus moves forwards, Venus in that prominent 10th house does forge a very positive link to Mars, which is escaping from the clutches of Pluto, and they forge an exact angle, a very enabling trine on the 22nd. So if there's a new job or role you want to go for, or you want to reimagine your finances in a more creative way, that can definitely help you, because Mars is about thrust, the second house is about desire, Venus in the sign of Aries is about raising your profile. So you may break something down and release yourself from a role that isn't working and go for something else which actually is much more exciting for you and helps you to connect with your higher truth, because the 11th house, where the Sun and Uranus and ultimately Mercury are, is very much about that. And Uranus rules the sky. It's co-rulership of the sign of Aquarius, very much about getting in touch with our true meaning. So whether it's friendships you want to break free from that aren't working, whether it is that corporate role that is too oppressive, whether it's wanting to release yourself in your own enterprise and perhaps work for someone else because it's just less complicated, all of these things feed into the narrative through the last 10 days of this month, which could see you very carefully mulling over where to go. So you could find yourself feeling that you're at some crossroad moment in the last phase of this month as the Sun moves into house 12 of reflection on the 20th. Saturn moves to the top of your chart on the 25th. So if you're really not enjoying that professional role, you may want to leave it. Or for some Cancers, it could be when you take on that responsibility because of the help of Venus and Mars, but it will be a job that you feel fits what you truly need. Mercury joins up with your 12th house on the 26th. Mercury in the 12th house can be complex. The wateriness of the 12th house, even if for you it is housed in the air sign of Gemini, can blunt and confuse some of what we're trying to achieve. However, the new moon of the 27th does have Mercury very close to it. So you're being asked, as the Sun merges with Mercury in a cazimi as the month comes to a close, to really use the more strategic energy of Mercury, but applying it to the soul, the 12th house. What is it that you're needing to get in touch with? You may find yourself wanting to withdraw a little bit at the end of the month. I know the sign of Gemini has a reputation of being very bubbly, interactive and friendly, but for you, you may want to just have some time to distill some of these complex strands that are going on. On the other hand, you could do some research. You could talk to people who have a very good psychological understanding, such as a life coach, perhaps a counsellor, or you could read or watch things that give you a greater understanding of your deeper motivations. And critically, because Pluto does go retrograde on the 4th, it does also, like it links brilliantly with Venus at the start of this month, it also links magnificently with Neptune through the last 10 days. So when it comes to Pluto, sometimes we have to let go of what we're attached to. The 8th house can be long-term financial security, can be an intense, close or physical, intimate relationship, or it could be something that's very rooted in our past. So that energy of Neptune is asking us to download the more spiritual dimension to try to unblock some of the changes that Pluto's asking for us to make, and that could be part of the pattern at the end of this month as well. So as you start the month, I feel that you could be feeling quite earnest around your self-worth and your value through the Mars-Pluto opposition, but that really was something that manifested from the 18th of last month. But if you have felt very limited in the amount of flexibility and options you have, especially around your work or your big responsibilities in life, that may be something you want to change on the back of the potent full moon. So over that full moon period, the following 2 weeks, with Uranus in the mix, that could see you wanting to free yourself from something that gives you the potential to just be more fluid, do what you want in a more spontaneous way. But whatever your decisions, by the end of this month, you may want some peace, quiet, tranquility, rest, relaxation, recuperation, perhaps even some healing too. Thank you so much for joining me, Cancer. Have a great month. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome, Leo, to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. If we go back to the start of November last year, Mars made the transition from a very psychological part of your scope into your own sign. Mars in the first house is where it really encourages us to showcase our unique identity. And in the sign of Leo, it really gives us the chance to be much more self-assured and self-confident about our goals and ambitions. You may have started to set in motion a new strand or plan or project which really exploded back into life on the 18th of April last month when Mars returned to your sign. You may have gone through a period of frustration, to be honest, from the 6th of January through to the 18th of April when Mars was back in a much more challenging part of your scope. But when Mars moved, that's really encouraging you to seize the moment. You thrive on confidence, but you also thrive on a degree of recognition. And if you have garnered more attention for your creativity, the thrust and excitement you've been creating, that's something that will have made you really feel much more alive. Your physical vitality may also have been enhanced. Now, if people close to you are cheering you on, the opposition with Pluto won't have inhibited your desire to make an impact. It will have heightened your determination. If, however, someone around you is not so keen on what you're trying to do because they may feel it deflects from their needs, that strand could show up right at the start of this month. Now, Venus, the relator, returns to your sector of truth, but all through April it was in a bruising relationship with Saturn. So if there were some difficult conversations about a close connection, an involvement, or even shared finances, it wouldn't be a surprise. But as Venus moves back into your sector of freedom and higher truths, it does merge with the misty but mesmeric energies of Neptune for the first time ever in our lifetimes in the sign of Aries. For you, I feel that this just gives you more encouragement to go with what Mars has been asking you to achieve. But Mars is still broadly opposed by Pluto as you start this month. So if there is some politics, they may need to be spoken through. And one of the things that Venus is meshing in with Neptune encourages you to do is not be too idealistic. Stay as factual as possible. Mercury in Aries starting this month will help you in that regard. But the Sun starts this month in a part of your chart where you're really ready to seize the limelight and draw to you much more attention and recognition. So if there is something creative, individualistic, maybe it's a sporting interest, maybe it's as a maker or as a creator, Mars is definitely being turning the dial up in terms of the thrust and the self-belief, but it's the Sun which is asking you to connect that out to the wider world, and that gathering of energy in Aries saying don't be fearful of being more independent in your approach, or perhaps even a little more daring. Now if you do decide to travel at the start of this month, it could be quite the experience, because Venus and Neptune combined could see you immerse yourself wherever you find yourself in a way which sees you soaking up every ounce of it in such a powerful way. It really can be incredible. If you're lucky enough to encounter someone that you really like, if you're single, Venus goes on to connect with Pluto. Now Pluto does retrograde from the 4th through to the middle of October in your sector of relationships. So if that's an area that's working well, it can be a time with Venus and Pluto forging a wonderful sextile where the potency of that connection just seems all the stronger and all the more gratifying. But also Venus in a sextile to Pluto can make us much more conscious of what we yearn for, because Pluto can be about desire, and of course Venus can as well. But Venus in the 9th house is about where we may push outside our comfort zone. So a key moment's reached, particularly when Venus emerges from shadow on the 5th. But I want to tell you that Mercury is going to join the Sun right at the top of your horoscope on the 10th. If you're not particularly happy in your work, it could be that you think about retraining in some ways, but don't necessarily expect somebody close to you to actually be particularly supportive, because Mercury T-squares in a pivot between the position of Mars and Pluto. So over the next few days, there may be something that you're ambitious about, perhaps a job you want to apply for, or even if you have an interview, it is going to be important to understand what the expectation would be of your potential employer or the customer that you may be seeking for your own enterprise. On the 11th, however, a very exciting aspect starts to shape up. Venus aligns with Mars in your sign within 3 degrees, and that's going to go on through to the end of the month. But critically, on the 22nd, they are exactly in a perfect trine. Because Mars is about self-confidence in Leo and Venus in Aries is about shaking things up, even though Venus is technically in its detriment in Aries, what I like about people who have Venus in Aries natally is it gives them the confidence to go in a direct way for what they need. It can make them perhaps a little bit more focused on their own individual situation, but if you are wanting to bring more social interaction or pleasure into your world, or you wanted to demonstrate your creativity in a professional context, the confidence that those two can create between them is something to really embrace in a big way. It's just that the full moon in Scorpio, where the moon is in her fall on the 12th, could see you have a moment when you don't feel quite as assured. And the reason it's your 4th house, that's where we need to feel safe. It needs to be where we're more protective. And because the Sun is very close to the potentially disruptive Uranus in your sector of worldly interaction, and that will go on right through to the 20th, there could be a shaky part at the heart of this month if you're suddenly feeling a bit exposed, that the attention is almost too intense for where you are, especially if you're developing something that's very personal to you. However, the movement of Mercury into Taurus will certainly see you wanting to get tangible results for whatever hard work that you're putting in. Now, Mercury is itself going to combine with Uranus from the 23rd through to the 26th. If you're looking for a job, something can just seem to come out of absolutely nowhere, and it can be something that really could, if you seize the moment, and you may have to move very quickly, be very valuable indeed. But I'd like to tell you, Leo, that from the 20th onwards, there is a switch. The sun moves into a much more idealistic part of your chart, but a much friendlier one which is much more about the network. It's much more about people, your friendships, your associations, but it's also about your highest hopes. It's joined on the 26th by Mercury, which rules that sign, which is very powerful. But intercepting that on the 25th, Saturn returns to Aries for the first time since 1999. Now, it depends on how old you are, but if you are more advanced in your life, you could look back to 1999 and recall what your experience was over those following 2.5 years, because Saturn in the sign of Aries is technically in its fall, because Aries is about initiation. Saturn can be about restraint, but also the 9th house where it moves into can be around things like travel. It can be around our mode of transport. It can be around our education. It can be around legal or contractual matters. And Saturn's going to ask you to consider all of those things over the next few years, but this is the first blush, lasting 3 months and 7 days through to the end of August. But if there is something that does need some resolution, you may find yourself seeking out expert help. Could be from a solicitor, maybe from an accountant, a business advisor. Maybe it's more of a personal issue that you want to get the voice of experience of a counsellor or a life coach. But don't be turned off from seeking that kind of support, because some of the information that you can gain over these next 3 months could be hugely valuable. Also, Saturn immediately links with Pluto. So if there is someone that you are very in touch with and connected to, rather than feeling in that kind of competitive energy at the start of the month of Mars opposite Pluto, this could see some people actually decide to align in a more formal way. So it could be a business contract, it could be a relationship where you take that next step towards a more binding commitment. For some people that could be by moving in, for others it could be actually getting married. If we think of Saturn can seal the deal, but of course it can also break things down. So the idealism that Venus and Neptune create at the start of this month, by the end of the month, as Neptune is aligning itself with Pluto, the last 10 days within 3 degrees, again, like Venus, for the first time in our lifetimes, that gives you an opportunity to examine whether your hopes can be matched by the reality around certain relationships. But on the 27th, the new moon in Gemini is very, very close to Mercury. Over the next month, if there are people you want to connect to, there are those that you want to spend more time with socially, mixing and mingling. There could be someone you feel quite flirty and drawn to, with Venus and Mars reaching their peak on the 22nd in their gorgeous sextile. I can't tell you how good that is. It really is superb. And then as the month closes, Mercury sits right in the disk of the Sun, a cazimi. A fantastic opportunity to think very long term about what's really important to you. Sometimes we can all get caught up with just dealing with the reality of life, and I feel that April was probably quite a tough month, particularly for intimacy, shared finances, or being clearer about who's in and who's not in, where there's a commitment or devotion or not. So as the month comes to a close, I feel there's a much lighter vibe. The air of Gemini just helps the flow of communication. Things can be moving around more. You can feel much more optimistic. I think collectively we're going to be experiencing that as well, to be honest. I think it's going to be much more gratifying. So as you come into the final part of this month, if you have a plan, a set of people that you love being with, or a hope or expectation that you want to fulfill, this can be a great chance to use the determination, self-belief and confidence of Mars being in your sign to really push forwards in a very, very powerful but also very dynamic and exciting way. Have a great month, Leo. Thank you so much for joining me. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome, Virgo, to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. Your ruler Mercury is going to make its way through 3 zodiac signs this month. That's really exciting, but it does bring potentially some extra complexity, but certainly some opportunities too, especially professionally, because by the end of this month, the chance for you to raise your profile and to reach people in positions of influence is enormous. But as we go into this month, Mercury is in the part of your chart to do with initiation, Aries, but for you personally to do with some kind of transformation. That transformation may be in terms of your thinking, it may be in terms of your deeper psychological understanding. In a more prosaic way, it could be around shared resources or finances, or it could even be around investments. And of course, investments and money has been a hot topic over the last month. But for you, April also saw Venus, the relator, and the money planet in a tight clench with Saturn, the planet of resistance, on 2 occasions. Now, that has meant that maybe you needed to consider how other people viewed you, or how you were relating to them. That may have been professionally, may have been in friendships, may have been personally. So Saturn's very complex, it's much maligned. It could have meant that last month there were some quite tense moments around relationships, but there may also have been an opportunity to get much clearer about what you were prepared to give, but also assert what you wanted as your minimum requirement. In other words, set your boundary. As we start this month, Venus returns back to the sign of Aries. But as it does, it forges a mesmeric link to Neptune. Now in the 8th house, that combination could mean that if someone has really captured your attention and the early dialogue has been really constructive and you are feeling very hopeful about what you could do, as long as in a sensitive way you feel they're in touch with you, and with the sun in your sister earth sign of Taurus, very much to do with higher truths, if it all feels right, there could be some kind of alliance forged at the start of this month, which could be very good indeed. But Neptune can also distort, so if you are talking about long-term financial planning, just be conscious of that. But also, by the 4th, Pluto, the planet of transformation, which is in your sector of health, work, obligations, that's pushing you, and has been in 3 stages since the 11-week first visit at the end of March 23, and then 21 Jan to 2nd of September last year, 19 November to now, pushing you to have a very honest look at your approach to the structure of your life, which is quite hard for Virgos because you take great pride in being very efficient and having the key pieces of knowledge that sometimes other people are not bothered with. They're too caught up in the big picture, whereas your meticulous approach often rewards you. But Pluto's actually challenging you at the moment to think about what you may in some ways transform. But because of Pluto's link to Venus through that first week of this month, I think it's possible that you could redeploy your resources in a new way which squeezes more from them. But also you could gain some psychological insights into your personal well-being and physical health by getting more knowledge, and that knowledge may be somewhat of an eye-opener, because something that you may have thought you had all of the information around, there may be more to gain, and that actually can help you in a very constructive way if you're open to the process. Because what happens with Pluto, it gives us a chance to lead the evolution and to really embrace it. But if we resist it, what Pluto can sometimes do is impose it. So for example, if you are working somewhere where it is just going to change because everything's changing so quickly, the sooner that you confront that, the sooner you can flex and use your experience and skills in a different way somewhere else. Now on the 5th of the month, Venus emerges from shadow. So the retrograde ended on the 13th of April. Remember then, Venus was in your sector of relating, but it coming out of the shadow period suggests that if there has been a time of uncertainty around relationships, you're going to have a much greater idea of where you stand. You might not necessarily have taken actions at that point, because by the 10th, your ruler Mercury moves into Zodiac sign 2 and joins up with the Sun and Uranus in the freedom-loving 9th house. Very much about expanding your horizons. Mercury can be about information, of course, the 9th house, higher knowledge. If you've often thought that you'd like to do an additional course, or you never had the opportunity to have formal education when you were younger, that is something that you could seriously consider over the next couple of weeks. But equally, Mercury does go on to clash with Mars and Pluto. Because if we go back to the 18th of April, and indeed if we go back to the 4th of November through to the 6th of January, Mars was in a very tender part of your situation. Mars is of course about assertion, action, can be a very dynamic, energizing planet, but in the 12th house, as it has returned to on the 18th of April, it can be very, very challenging at times. Our emotions can be quite up and down. Even if you pride yourself on someone who has a real sense of equilibrium about life, old issues that you thought were resolved can suddenly take on a life force of their own. Could be old separations, could be an accident you had, it may have been some misfortune. And looking at it again in a more psychological way is actually a very positive thing to do. But because Mars is in an opposition with Pluto at the start of this month, as it was in the last 2 weeks of last month, if there's something you're resisting about changing your world, perhaps to do with not feeling quite ready or feeling a bit vulnerable about those changes, Mars in some ways creates more tension if, like I said before, we resist the power of Pluto pushing for those changes. So Mercury comes into that relationship in what's known as a T-square. So it's a pivot between the two positions. And Pluto in the 6th house is asking you to update that part of your life and approach, which can be very calibrated and very organized, but update it with new awareness, because Pluto can be the revealer planet. Mars is about thrust, but of course it can be about anger. The 12th house can be psychological. So if you're feeling drained or out of energy, or feeling very frustrated or overwhelmed, or feel that people are kind of being a bit picky and not really being very acknowledging of your skills, then that can all start to come up to the boil as Mercury moves into your ninth house, because the ninth house can be about freedom, but it also can be about other people saying what they think and making observations about you. And because of the square to Mars and the square to Pluto, suddenly things can come into the open that could be a little painful to hear. But that brings us to the full moon of the 12th. It's in Scorpio, the moon in Scorpio in her 4, not her best location, but in an opposition with the sun, and a little more broadly with the disruptor planet of Uranus. 3rd, 9th, conversations. And it's possible that conversations can be highly charged over the next week or so, because Uranus is the truth seeker of the zodiac. And for you, the 9th house is higher knowledge. The 3rd house, where the moon is sometimes where we can chat things through in perhaps a more frivolous way, but not really be so attached in a more feeling way. Now, obviously, the signs of Scorpio and Taurus are very much about attachment. They're fixed signs, and they can be about money. So you could be discussing finances over this 2-week period, but there may be a need to make some changes. Now, Uranus can see us wanting to create space. So it could be through decluttering. You can create more money, selling off things you no longer need. But the 8th house position of the sun can be about where we're quite intimate with someone. If suddenly that doesn't feel right with your ruler in the 9th house of freedom, you may see yourself considering whether you need at least some temporary space. So it's powerful stuff, to be honest, right at the heart of this month. And the sun and Uranus, and then Mercury and Uranus, are in a shake-up at the heart of May, from the 15th to the 20th in the case of the sun, and in the case of your ruler from the 23rd to the 26th. So there can be sudden developments. But with Uranus, there can often be opportunities. So it may be a way to look at your resources in a fresh way and be more entrepreneurial. And the only thing I would say is, if you do rush, which can be a temptation with Uranus, just be aware that not everything that we speculate on can necessarily pay off. But that sees us return to the issue of Venus, because when Venus speeds up, comes out of shadow on the 5th, by the 11th it starts to align with Mars. So though Mars can be quite a challenging influence for you this month, that trine between the two planets that are often involved in sex and attraction is very strong, which peaks on the 22nd. Now, it's possible that you could be drawn to someone, and for now the relationship may stay confidential. You may not necessarily want to share it with people. Perhaps one of you is in or coming out of a relationship which isn't quite resolved. That often can happen, of course, and that potential is there, but there's certainly the potential for an enormous attraction too. Now, because Mars in the 12th house can also make us think about old experiences and old authority figures, if there was someone from your past that you used to work with that you found very charismatic, but also someone you had respect for, you could think about how you could use the skills and talents you learned then in a new way to earn money now, or there could be a reconnection with that person in a purely professional context. Because, Virgo, when you get to the 20th, the sun reaches up to the very top of your chart. This is the midday position. This is where we get the maximum amount of sunlight. So for you, whatever your talents are, you have a fantastic chance to bring them to a wider audience, to gain more attention, but critically more recognition through the last 10 days of this month. But of course, Saturn's moving this month too, returning to Aries for the first time since 1999. And for you, that's the 8th house. And the 8th house is where we're all in. It's where we're devoted. spiritually, psychologically, financially, or sexually, but it can also be where we want to be all out, because the 8th house can be about endings, and Saturn can create limitation, particularly as it's in its full in Aries. So something that you were trying to get clear last month with that combination of Venus and Saturn, if it has proved elusive, by the end of this month, as Saturn reaches that point, over the next 3 months, you are reaching a juncture in your celestial journey when you may have to look something directly in the eye. But what Saturn does do is forge a fabulous angle to Pluto, and also Neptune is within 3 degrees of Pluto towards the end of this month, for the first time in our lifetimes, with Neptune in Aries and Pluto in Aquarius. So huge stuff. And you might find yourself thinking, how could I earn money with this gathering of energy starting to manifest in your sector of goals and success? How could I earn money which works for me in terms of my practicality? Often your great gift and the metronomic approach you have to situations, Pluto's just asking you to bring that along, but perhaps think about applying it in a bit of a different way. Saturn with Pluto can see you improve your finances if you're very, very realistic. But at the same time, as Mercury joins the Sun, your ruler, for the 3rd zodiac sign of the month on the 26th, then merging through the new moon of the 27th, the following month could see you making some very, very bold moves in terms of what you want to do for a living. For example, if you did separate around a professional relationship in April, you might think more about working for yourself and showcasing your talents. If you've got a hobby, something that you've been working on part-time could become much more at the heart of your existence, because your chance to demonstrate your brilliance, even your genius, as this month comes to a close, is enormous with a Mercury cazimi, a superior conjunction. The moving forwards Mercury meets with the Sun, while the Sun catches up with Mercury, and they merge, and the power and radiance of the Sun glows up Mercury's core abilities. And in the 10th house, which is kind of a bit Capricorn-like, it is about goals, ambitions, training, can be about leadership, could be about how you communicate your message. So although transformation is in the air, although you may feel tender and vulnerable with Mars in your 12th house, although with your ruler in a T-square with Mars and Pluto's opposition, which could see some essential truth surface in an uncomfortable way, whether the full moon is asking you to think very carefully about some of your ideals, ideas, even about how you approach your mode of transport. Don't be surprised for some Virgos if you start walking or running a lot more from the middle of this month, or equally thinking about some form of new transport, whether it's an electric bike or a scooter. Uranus very much about electricity, but equally about just being inspired by ideas, but breaking the shackles of any part of your nature that has just been sticking with a particular role for a very long time because of that appreciation you have for routine and structure. But if that has basically lost its life meaning for you, you need to reapply that part of your nature in a new environment. And that's really what the end of this month is about. So whatever your point in life you are, it's your connection with the world that's due for some kind of radical shake-up, but it's a radical shake-up that you can benefit hugely from if you're prepared to go with the flow and release relationships, connections, alliances, or jobs that just no longer serve your purpose. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great May. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome Libra to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. The big takeout right at the start of the month, your ruler Venus back into your opposite sign. Technically debilitated in Aries, but having Venus in the 7th house is a very strong position in order to reach better accords. But it is meeting up with Neptune for the first time in our lifetimes in the sign of Aries. That can create a very special alliance. You could encounter someone at the start of this month that you find to be truly inspirational. This may be professionally, it may be personally, particularly once Venus comes out of her shadow period on the 5th, but just before she's aligning to Pluto. Pluto now in the most charismatic part of your chart, the 5th house. That can be about romance, certainly about where we can be more playful, self-expressive, and an area that has been blunted for you over the recent years of Pluto going through the delicate 4th house. So if there is someone you experience at the start of this month, you may find them very, very alluring, very interesting. Mercury also in Aries at the start of the month suggests that you could have a lot to talk about, and therefore the connection doesn't have to be romantic. It could be just a collaboration or a friendship which just chimes beautifully for this moment of your life. But the sun starts this month in the part of your chart which is about transformation, but it can also be about the parts of life to do with shared resources, investments, savings, legacies, all those kind of things too. And the sun is going to be joined on the 10th by Mercury. Mercury will speed up. But on the 4th, before then, Pluto does start a backward journey. One that goes on, it's an annual thing, for 5 months through to the middle of October. But that's not going to stop Pluto forging that amazing link to your ruler at the start of this month, but also a very special one to Neptune through the last 10 days of this month too. So just because Pluto's going backwards, don't see it as being a negative. Pluto's about change, but it's also about revelations. It can be about consequences. So for example, if a romantic relationship isn't going so well, some of the niggles that probably came out in April with Saturn applying to your ruler Venus almost exactly through the whole of the month, but precisely on 2 occasions, it may have been difficult for some people to get beyond what's not quite working. And of course Saturn is moving into your sector of relating for the first time since 1999 on the 25th. And that too forges a very strong link with Pluto as well. But Saturn in Aries, a bit like Venus, not at its best, but it does give you an opportunity to set your boundaries later this month. So that's the big picture as we come into May. But what about where the moon is as the month begins? Well, it's very close to Jupiter. Jupiter's the planet of plenty, the planet of exuberance. In the sign of Gemini, your sister air sign, very much about travel, higher knowledge, information in general. But both the moon and Jupiter are challenged by Saturn and the North Node as this month begins. And in the case of Jupiter, that's broadly in touch with the North Node for the whole of May. So when it comes to obligations and responsibilities, there may be part of you that wants to feel less penned in, with less choices. If you have been in a situation where you've been very dedicated and supportive of other people, perhaps in your personal life, maybe at work, the 6th house where Saturn's been for 2 years, very much about those chores, can be about where we're very conscientious. It can be about details, but at times it may have seen you feel a bit burdened. So I feel that what Jupiter and the moon are saying at the start of the month, there's a part of you that wants to be a little bit freer. But from the 10th, Mercury moves out of Aries and joins up with the Sun and Uranus in your 8th house. But the critical thing is that Venus speeds up, your ruler, and then starts to align with the mighty Mars. Mars starts this month in a much more charismatic position, the 11th house. Why I like Mars in the 11th house is that Mars can be about I. It can be about what we need to achieve for ourselves. The 11th house can be more collaborative, but if you recall, at the heart of April, Mars, when it returned to Leo, clashed with Pluto. You may have found that there was some kind of power battle that played out. Maybe it was just about trying to manage your time. There could still be traces of that as you come into this month. But the thing is that Mercury, once it moves from the discussion, interactive, and perhaps listening part of your scope, as it moves into the 8th house, that's more the outcome of those conversations. And the 8th house can be about endings as much as beginnings. The 8th house can also be where we get beneath the surface. We're much more penetrative in our thinking. So if we did need to understand a financial product, for example, a mortgage offer, or perhaps a saving or pension plan, Mercury can be very astute, but it clashes with the exuberant position of both Mars and Pluto. And they're saying in some ways that you're wanting to enjoy yourself. So there may be some bolt of reality that you need to grapple with Mercury's arrival in Taurus. And then, however, the best aspect of the whole month starts to shape up, particularly for your sign Libra, because Venus, in that very sweet relating 7th house, forges a stunning link with Mars from the 11th through to the end of the month. It peaks on the 22nd. It's a trine, very, very positive. Now, because they're both in fire signs, that can create initiative. And Venus in Aries also gives us a little bit more self-confidence to go for what we want. If you encounter someone socially that you think is really interesting, there's a much greater chance as these two stimulate each other that you'll be the one that makes the first move. You are a cardinal sign, and therefore you have it in your personal toolbox to be much more assertive if you need to be. But as I say, Mars in the 11th house can keep it friendly. So I think socially, in terms of meeting up with people and having fun, that does provide a lovely antidote to the more challenging energy that's permeating across the 8th and 2nd house cusp of your chart from the 12th with the full moon. The full moon in Scorpio, not its favourite position in full, opposite the Sun, but critically Uranus. From the 15th to the 20th, they are within 3 degrees. We also have a angle or a connection between Mercury and Uranus too, from the 23rd to the 26th. So if there is something you're drawn towards around finances, particularly if you're quite inventive, a more entrepreneurial type of person, you could find yourself diving into something in quite a fast moving way, which could be very exciting, but just be conscious of whether that is really something that you're truly comfortable with, because Uranus can be quite impulsive, and I just think that that's something to be mindful of. However, on the 20th, despite the fact that Mercury is closing in on its conjunction with Uranus, the Sun moves into your sector of freedom, travel, higher education, new experiences, independence, adventurism. If you can get away for a vacation towards the end of this month, or sign up for a course of study or a professional course which improves your qualifications and raises your profile in terms of the type of jobs that you could pull, then that's very constructive too. But Saturn also moves into that 7th house. So the Sun's linking brilliantly to Saturn. The Sun's linking brilliantly to Pluto, transformation, but also you have the Sun with Saturn and Saturn with Pluto. So despite the fact that Pluto is retrograde and Saturn in the 7th house can be a dead end on a relationship that's not quite working, it also can be a time of very constructive links, especially if you feel the truth of them really works for you. So the 9th house is where our philosophies align. It's where we might talk to someone who loves adventure or loves outdoor activities or has an appreciation of foreign culture or languages. Anything which brings a freshness to your world through the last 10 days of this month is really going to be exciting. And with Mercury arriving in its home sign of Gemini on the 26th, merging with the new moon on the 27th, if there is something that you're wanting to free yourself from psychologically, so it could be a mindset, it could be something that you've been a bit too attached to, some kind of interest that perhaps is too consuming, it may be working too hard, whatever it is that you're looking to have some independence from, you have a great chance as this month comes to a close, particularly with the Mercury Cazimi on the last day. So the issue really as this month begins for you, particularly Libra, is how you work with that 7th house energy, because that mesmerizing combination between Venus and Neptune could bring someone very special into your world. Saturn will certainly ask some questions whether it can be for the long term, or it could, as I say, bring the closure door down on a time which just isn't working. Even if it doesn't happen straight away, because Saturn's on that 7th house cusp right through to the end of August, that window, and especially when Uranus goes into your 9th house on the 9th of July, 7th of July I should say, through to the 7th of October, that could also be a time when you seek liberty from a job, a friendship, a pattern, or a relationship which doesn't really work for you, because the planets are conspiring in the most amazing golden triangle between Uranus, Saturn, Neptune and Pluto to prime you up to go for what's truly right for you. And that's going to bring a quantum shift in your situation, which is going to be something you truly appreciate in the years to come, because I feel it will be a staging post for a very exciting new chapter in your situation. Have a great month, Libra. Take care and goodbye. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome Scorpio, it's your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. Your two ruling planets, Mars traditional and Pluto modern, are face to face as you begin this month. Mars, if you recall, returned to a very charismatic part of your chart on the 18th of April. The 10th house is where we can demonstrate our talents, but Mars is very much about authority in that area. The host Leo is about confidence and radiance. So what a great chance for you to demonstrate to people just what you're capable of. It's just that Pluto is in a very tender location, very much to do with home, emotional and family evolution. If you're renovating a property, it wouldn't be a surprise. You may have done that over the last couple of years. You may have moved home. There may have been an addition to your family. You may be providing support or care to relatives, because Pluto is about change. So having these two players broadly opposite does create a tension, because Mars is asking you to be very dashing, charismatic and dynamic, just at a time when Pluto may be making you more conscious of your vulnerabilities or need for security. But the Sun starts this month in your sector of relating. And relationships, such an important area of life. We don't necessarily have to be in a personal romantic tie. We have a relationship with ourselves, with our animals, our neighbours, relatives and friends. And those alliances are going to come very much into the astral spotlight on the back of the full moon of the 12th. But as you start this month, Venus, the relator, returns to a very practical location in Aries. She's not at her best here, but what Venus in the 6th house encourages us to do is to be thoughtful. So those little gestures that we carry out, making someone we live with, for example, a nice cup of tea, and just checking on how they are, can hold a lot of value. Professionally, if we offer to cover a shift, if someone wants some time off, it's going to be appreciated. So our love language can broadly be quite practical with Venus in that 6th house. But Venus merges with the dreamy and potentially inspirational energy of Neptune for the first time in our lifetimes in Aries through the first week. So if there is someone who's asking you to do something for them, it's important that you do maintain your boundaries, because it's good to be caring, but it's not good to be caring if it takes too much energy from us. We don't really genuinely have the time. So just be conscious of that. But if you are someone who loves animals, for example, if you do have a new addition come into your family right at the start of this month, it could be a very, very lovely experience, because Venus and Neptune heightens in a very delicate way the vibration of our connections. But the 6th house, very much to do with the aforementioned pets. However, the 6th house can also be about our work. If you are a creative, but you're a creative who wants to also produce tangible results, Venus and your traditional ruler Mars are going to be very influential for you this month. It starts to build up because Venus, as it edges forwards, links with your modern ruler. So you may find yourself being more conscious of some family relationships, because people's family structures can often be quite unique these days. It may be that someone close to you who's not necessarily a blood relative, you can just gain a greater appreciation of their thoughtfulness, their practical input into your life. But it equally could be someone like an aunt or uncle, which the 6th house represents. And the 4th house, because it's the home, could mean that you forge a relationship with a tradesperson, artisan, who does something for you that improves the physical comfort or the space that you're existing in. So that's a really nice thing. But Pluto does go retrograde on the 4th. It's an annual 5-month journey through to the 14th of October. And I think it's possible that you could be rejigging in some ways the practical environment of your home. Because although Venus is initially connecting to Pluto in such a positive way, later in the month when Saturn arrives in Aries for its first visit on the 25th of May since 1999, for just over 3 months and 7 days through to the end of August, it too is going to connect to Pluto. So if you were going to do some construction where you're living, or home improvements, or downsizing, or adapting in some kind of way, your timing could be absolutely spot on. Venus herself emerges from shadow on the 5th in that practical 6th house, but as she speeds up is going to align to Mars right through to the end of the month. So where you have good relationships professionally, whether it's someone that you work directly with or whether it's the public, those relationships could be very uplifting with the link between Mars and Venus. Because Mars, unbridled in Leo, can be quite the attention seeker. I think what Venus does is brings a little bit more simpatico, sophistication and nuance into the dynamic. So if you're thrusting and aiming for some kind of breakthrough professionally, your ability to work closely with people in a very pragmatic and helpful way will really be very much appreciated. Because to be honest, Scorpio, your relationships come very sharply into focus from the 10th of this month. Because then Mercury plays catch up with the Sun in Taurus, but critically also Uranus. If you think back through those 5 months of 218 from the middle of May and then from March 19, Uranus has been shaking things up around all sorts of relationships. It may have seen you want to have more personal space, create a bit of distance from people you no longer feel connected to. It may have seen the breakdown in a long-time relationship, but equally you could have had some very, very exciting connections. They may not all have been particularly long-lasting, but they may have made your pulse race, because Uranus can be an electric energy and it also can be an exciting one, but it can also be a little unpredictable. But the full moon in your sign, which occurs on the 12th, is going to see the moon in your sign, where she is in full, opposite both the Sun but also the position of Uranus. But critically on the 10th, as Mercury joins up with the Sun, so she T-squares your two rulers. So remember I said Mars is pushing you to raise your profile, be more self-assured, be more confident about pitching for what would really sate your ambitions, just at a time when Pluto may be exposing, because he is the revealer, exposing some sensibilities, and also some vulnerabilities. And because Mercury intercepts them on the axis of how you relate, and then straight after that, with that potentially intense energy of the Scorpio full moon, if there is something that needs to come into the open around either a home, emotional or professional relationship, it could do so in week 3 of this month. In fact, Uranus plays catch up and goes, Mercury plays catch up and goes alongside Uranus from the 23rd to the 26th. But it could also see that connection, and that connection doesn't have to be romantic. So you may encounter someone whose ideas may just really excite you. You may feel that they're very innovative, perhaps a little unpredictable, but that makes them all the more intriguing. And because Venus is linking so assuredly to your traditional ruler Mars, that can help you to stabilize into the sudden change or energy that lights up the heart of this month. But I have to be honest, that Scorpio full moon does suggest if you're not happy in a relationship, the chances are it might come to a close. But no one will ever leave our lives who's truly right for us. And what I would say, as the Sun makes its way into the deep, passionate and transformational 8th house of your chart on the 20th, which is very redolent of the energy of your sign, it's not a direct match because, of course, the host is about communication. Gemini likes to talk things through, send text messages and emails. But the 8th house can be where you're thinking about what's not necessarily terribly obvious. So in a more spiritual way, that can be our psychological well-being, our interest in things like esoteric subjects. You may find your appetite for them absolutely explode through the last 10 days of this month. So if you are someone who wants some guidance, you could reach out for some kind of one-to-one with someone, and it may prove to be very valuable. But the 8th house can also be a much more practical influence. It can be about what we share financially. It can be about investments. It can also be about who we contract with, whether it's for our utilities, whether it's who we bank with, who we save with, who we invest with. And all of those things come under the astral microscope because stern Saturn moves into Aries on the 25th and brings a sharper a sharper vibe to your powers of analysis. Now, I'm not hiding the fact that that can often be one of your great gifts. You know, you can have a conversation with people, but in your mind there's a subtext of what you really feel they're saying. So your ability to tease out what people's true motivations is the stuff of astral law. However, because Mercury joins up with the Sun on the 26th, they're together on the Gemini new moon of the 27th, and together exactly on the 30th in a Cazimi. And the last 10 days of this month also sees not just Saturn linked to Pluto or Saturn linked to the Sun, but also Neptune in a shimmering alliance with Pluto for the first time in our lifetimes too. So it's massive stuff as this month draws to a close. But that part of you that just understands life is a series of very deep commitments or investments of attention, energy and enthusiasm until you reach that point where you need to release and start the journey again. There could be some of that around some part of your situation towards the end of this month. It doesn't have to be a partner, it doesn't have to be your job. It could be an interest, it could be an attachment you have to a particular way of being. It could be a pattern that you have in your life, as much as it could be something that's more tangible. But that inner work that you can do towards the end of this month can provide an enormous amount of illumination, because the Sun is about that. It's about where we see the light. And because the 8th house can be where things are hidden, the revelations you get at the end of this month, or the brainwaves you enjoy, or perhaps the perceptions that you forge, can all be hugely valuable to you as the month draws to a close. It's been a pleasure being with you, Scorpio. Have a great May. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three: the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome, Sagittarius, to your in-depth monthly forecast for May. Now, last month, with the gathering of energy in Pisces, but particularly Saturn, the more emotional, family or home-based dimension of your situation may have called out for your attention, whether you wanted it to or not. But the change point was the 18th, because then Mars moved into your 9th house. Now, the 9th house has a redolence with the energy of your sign. It can be very much to do with independence, freedom, adventure, but particularly when Mars is in the mix, because Mars is very much about being a little more assertive, perhaps even risk-taking. But Mars did go face-to-face with Pluto in your 3rd house, everyday communication. The 9th house can be the big picture, and sometimes things like contracts, the law, and philosophies. So you may have found yourself going for that rather tender, protective space with all those energies in the 4th house of your situation, to suddenly wanting to break out. You may even have been much more outspoken, which brings us to the start of this month, because the gathering of energy in your 5th house, which is augmented on the 1st of this month by the lovely Venus, includes Mercury, but also for the first time, in terms of Venus's connection, Neptune in Aries. So they're aligning together in your fellow fire sign for the first time in our collective lifetimes. And through the first week of this month, they can see you feeling much more outgoing, particularly as Mars and Pluto are still sparring. But through that sparring, it can also create a spark, a thrust, because ideas, knowledge are always areas that excite you. And because the 5th house can also be fun and sociability, and having Mercury there can be a little bit playful, perhaps even mischievous. Your sense of humour can also spark up as we start this month. And also Venus then goes on to forge a very strong alliance with Pluto, the planet of transformation, but thereafter it starts to build into an epic alliance with Mars. So as much as Mars and Pluto in that direct opposition may have created some quite intense discussions, maybe even some disagreements, or may have seen you very earnest about asserting your ideas, once Mars starts to move beyond the position of Pluto, but Venus continues to align with Mars, reaching the peak on the 22nd, you could find that something much more playful, much more outgoing, much more dynamic and exciting than was possible, particularly in the first half of April, when Mercury and Venus were still in retrogrades and also being clamped and escorted very closely, in the case of Venus, by the stern Saturn. You're going to feel a much greater sense of freedom. But that doesn't mean to say that some of your responsibilities and obligations aren't still going to be calling out to you. And that in itself could create a little bit of a conflict. But by the 4th, Pluto does go retrograde and will be so for the following 5 months, an annual event. Inverts around about 2.5 degrees through to the 14th of October, but it's still in the 3rd house, which can be to do with your physical movements, it can be to do with how you think, your belief systems. Pluto can be the revealer, but of course it can be about evolution. So you could find yourself wanting to move around more, maybe even do something a little bit more active at the start of this month, but the more binding energy of the Sun in Taurus at the start of this month suggests that whatever you're doing creatively or fun-wise, if you can find a way to make it work in a more practical dimension, that's good too. The 5th, however, sees Venus leave its shadow. The retrograde ended on the 13th of April in Pisces. Because it returns to Aries at the start of this month, for you that's very, very glamorous, the 5th house. And even though Venus is technically debilitated in Aries, don't worry about that. For you, it's going to flame you up. Whatever excites or interests you comes to life. So Venus coming out of shadow helps along that process. But on the 10th, Mercury joins the Sun in Taurus, the 6th house. It's all about the details. And it's really important over the next few days as Mercury T-squares both Mars in the escapist 9th house and the 3rd house of Pluto, that you don't rush things. I feel that there can be a part of most Sagittarians that, although you have a fantastic appetite for information, if the information is more mundane, it can be a little dull. So, you know, whatever you might not really want to engage with, the small print, if you like, of something on an everyday practical basis, just be conscious that something could be missed that's important, because you'd rather be talking about or doing something that's much more exciting and critically dramatic. So some practical strands are emphasized even more by the full moon in the tender 12th house for you on the 12th. Scorpio is not where the moon's at its best. If there are any fears or anxieties, or if there is any politics just simmering beneath the surface, particularly professionally, they could explode into the open over the next week or so. And just be aware that Mercury also is going to move and connect with Uranus too. Uranus has been quite a challenging influence, I feel, at times since 2019, the March, because the 6th house is where we do need to be aligned, we do need to have a structure, we do need to be metronomic, and Uranus doesn't like any of those things because it's so free-spirited. So if you have found routines or work or jobs rather dull and changed them several times, not really a surprise. But here on this event, it's essentially saying to us that the physical domain, the 6th house, which is to do with our health, energy, vitality, diet, exercise, routines, is confronted by the moon in a very psychological area, which can be about the parts of life we don't want to look at, our vulnerabilities, our shadow side, and especially at work. If you do rush something, someone could seize on a small error and inflate it and exaggerate it in a way which could really frustrate you. So just prepare yourself for that phase of the month by really concentrating, even if it isn't really something that particularly engages or excites you. However, the 20th sees the sun move into your 7th house, where your ruler has been since the end of May last year. And the sun moving into Gemini is an opportunity to clarify if there has been any tensions or mixed wires at the heart of the month. On the 25th, Saturn moves into your 5th house for the first time since 1999. It does link with Neptune immediately, but forges a great sextile to Pluto, and that combination can be very good. If you are a creative, or you are artistic, or you have great imagination, or you've a story to tell, or there's fun you want to have, what Pluto and Saturn are saying in their collaboration, which can be cooperative, they're saying, look, it is important to have a clear plan, do the research and execute it in a disciplined way. And Saturn in the 5th house could therefore in the next 3 months give you an opportunity to get something that's important to you, get some kind of foundation point established which you can grow from next year when Saturn returns in the early part of 26 for the longer term. But the 5th house can of course be a romance, and it can be about play, and it can be about children, and Saturn can be of course quite limiting. So if there is something that isn't really quite as structured as it could be, Saturn's urging you to give it some handrails, because if you have those handrails, it can be more sustained. But if you have been seeing someone and it hasn't been much fun recently, especially with the clash between Venus and Saturn all through April, so Saturn in your 4th house, making you much more conscious of your feelings, Venus about relationships, I feel that Saturn moving into your 5th house and the sun in your 7th, linking back to Saturn, but also Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, joining your 7th house on the 26th, then the new moon of the 27th, then the Mercury cazimi at the 30th. All of that's asking you to gain clarity, illumination, and wanting to have very clean connections to others. So where the air, Gemini, is flowing freely and there's good listening skills either side, there could be a very exciting collaboration which starts to shape up towards the end of this month. But it needs to be one that doesn't have the dramas and heaviness and disappointments and limitations that maybe have been more prevalent over the last couple of years because of Saturn being in your 4th house. So if you feel safe and secure with someone, but you can still be playful and have fun, you know you've got the right mix. If you are feeling that it's burdensome and you're not really enjoying it, there's not much sense of pleasure, the 5th house, Saturn's giving you an early alert of something that does need to be addressed. And because Uranus is going to move into your sector of relating on the 7th of July through to the 7th of October, if something isn't working for you around a relationship, that could be a time, particularly with Saturn just in those first couple of degrees of Aries, that you may decide to finally call time, however hard you've tried. But what that 7th house energy does provide you at the end of this month is huge opportunities to get a better flow of information backwards and forwards. So even if there have been some challenges at the heart of the month, especially professionally at work, you can resolve them with patience and a desire and willingness to find points of communication, collaboration, but critically also cooperation. Have a great month, Sagittarius. Take care and goodbye. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three: the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome Capricorn to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. Your ruler Saturn is on the move. On the 25th of this month, moving into the sign of Aries, which is the first zodiac sign. Yours is the 10th. The 10th house energy of your ruler Saturn is about culmination. It's about when things reach a point where there is a structure in place. We have got something that's more established. We've got some methodology, whereas the position of Saturn in Aries is the start of a new journey. And that new journey for you is very much about where you live. Your sense of security can be to do with family relationships, but also to do with your inner world and your relationship to it. So Saturn's arrival comes on the back of Neptune moving at the end of March into Aries, and Venus returns to the sign on the first day of this month. And the lovely thing about Venus's combination with Neptune, the first in our lifetimes, through the first week of this month, is if you'd like to change things decoratively at home, you could do something that's really quite special. Your use of colours, the imagination, the fabrics you choose, whatever you're considering around your home, something could be very lovely indeed. Unfortunately, Neptune can be around illusion too. If there has been someone you've been grappling to get some form of communication working with through the month of April, because Saturn was crunching Venus for the whole of the month and exactly on 2 occasions, you could enter this month feeling a little bit unsure, perhaps even a little disenchanted, because your sensitivity is going to be that much higher. The sun actually starts this month in a very bubbly, effervescent location, but with Mercury also, like Venus and Neptune, in your 4th house, that can see you feeling a little more inward. Or at least if you do socialise, wanting to be with people you know well, or visit places that you're particularly comfortable and at ease within. But that combination of Venus and Neptune makes way for a connection between Pluto in your 2nd house and Venus. Because Venus can be about money, if you wanted to cash in, perhaps sell a property that no longer fits your needs, or to release property that you no longer need, because Pluto can be about where we let go, you may want to let go of something that creates more security. So that could be in some ways having something in the here and now, and that could mean that you make a call on a big financial matter. But also it could mean that someone in your family is actually very generous and thoughtful and supportive. So for example, if you're trying to rent a flat or buy a property, it may be that a family member can in some ways help to make that process come together. But on the 4th, Pluto goes into its annual 5-month retrograde. And what Pluto is going to ask you to do over the years now, through to 244, is really get much more au fait with what your values are, what's really important to you. Now obviously finance can be part of that, you're a very practical, pragmatic sign, but equally it's what's important to us in terms of our beliefs. So the 2nd house can be what we value personally, and also it's how we value ourselves. If that is a little bit tentative with you, through the next 5 months, that may be an area that you do need to work harder on. But on the 5th, Venus moves forwards, comes out of its post-retrograde shadow, and if you have gone through a bit of a journey when it comes to a relationship matter, because of Venus's retrograde, you will start to get fresh air and clarity on where things stand. But on the 10th, Mercury joins up with the Sun in your 5th house. And I have to be honest, Mercury in the 5th house is one of its better positions. It can be very charismatic, very playful, perhaps even a bit mischievous. So your sense of humour could be revived. But if you recall, in the middle of April, from the 18th, Mars, the planet of drive and passion and desire, moved into the part of your chart to do with long-term finances, but also potentially intimacy. But it faced off with Pluto in the 2nd house. Maybe you encountered some kind of tussle. Maybe you were attracted to someone and didn't quite understand why. It may have been someone you didn't even like. Then again, you may have felt unsure about how to work forwards around a financial matter, or particularly shared finance. But with Mercury intercepting the two of them in a T-square, you could feel actually a little bit more carefree when it comes to finance, and may decide that it's time for some kind of treat. The 2nd house of Pluto and the 5th house of Mercury can be to do with speculation. But just beware that Uranus is in that 5th house, has been full-time since March 2019, and of course the Sun. And although Venus moves forwards and starts to align fantastically well with Mars from the 11th through to the end of the month, which means if you are looking for property, or you are wanting to make some shrewd financial moves with the resources you've got, there's a great chance you can. That peaks the angle between them on the 22nd. But it could also mean that you're drawn to someone in a romantic context that you actually feel very comfortable with. I feel modern society is very much based on appearance, isn't it? It's very much based on how people dress, how they appear. But the best relationships are where we have that spark, but also there's the emotional connection too. And Venus and Mars can tease that into the open for you as this month goes on. However, on the 12th, the full moon in Scorpio is the part of your chart to do with where you connect to people. Whereas the Sun and also Mercury and Uranus are in the part of your chart that's to do with what you want, the individual. If you feel that something is bogging you down, maybe it's a friend who just wants to dominate your time somewhat, maybe it's an interest that's taking you away from what you need to do for you completely individually. Maybe there's something that fascinates you, but you're not sure whether you've quite got the confidence to go with it. That full moon is asking you to make some big judgment calls. But what Uranus can do is push you to leave your comfort zone. And because you're a sign that does often put material security first, sometimes you will stick with relationships or situations that aren't really feeding your soul quite as much as they should. And if that is an issue, the link between Venus and Mars can make you much more conscious of what is important to you. And that's why Venus aligning with Pluto at the start of the month and Pluto's retrograde are so critical, because it's all about getting more in touch with what's authentically right for your key values and the foundations of your world, not settling essentially. So Uranus can push you to be a bit more provocative in your approach. Now Mercury moves forwards and links up with Uranus too from the 23rd to the 26th, but there's a much more practical dimension to your chart in the last 10 days of this month. And that's because the Sun moves into Gemini on the 20th, Saturn moves into your 4th house on the 25th, as I mentioned before, but Mercury joins up with the Sun on the 26th. They both angle back to Saturn in a sextile, but they angle back to Pluto in a trine. So when it comes to your values, your sense of security, Aries energy, but also the practicalities of life, the Gemini energy towards the end of this month, maybe there are some fine tunings that you can make to actually get things in better alignment. The new moon certainly can see you thinking about your work, for example. From the 27th, the backdrop energy for the next month means that even if you do make a number of small adjustments, it could be quite significant. Maybe it's working a slightly different schedule, maybe spending some time working from home. Maybe it's considering self-employment. Maybe it's about providing services. Maybe it's about getting a bit more organised, because even if you're someone who has got a lot of life worked out, there may still be some areas of refinement and improvement to make your situation that much more metronomic. Maybe it's some improvements around your diet or exercise routine. All this virtue is very much to the fore for you in terms of your thinking and discussion, Gemini, but the outcome needs to give you something tangible. And that's really what Saturn's going to be pushing you to do through to the end of August. It wants you to make your home emotional world workable, and if something isn't quite working, it needs to be looked at, and that needs to be an area where you pour your attention. The month ends with a Mercury cazimi, the 6th house. So even though the host is Gemini, the 6th house is Mercury's influence over the sign of Virgo, precision, where we're more analytical. So your attention to detail towards the end of this month can be a revelation, whether it's looking at the labels on foods, whether it's becoming a little bit more conscious of your sleep, whether you're more conscious of who has a good energetic exchange with you. Sometimes the people that we like a lot and can be great fun may in some ways might not necessarily be who we want to be with all the time, because there are some parts of life that need to be where we're looking after our own situation. So the 6th house is where perhaps it's good to be of service to people, but most of all we need to be of service to ourselves. So getting things a bit more in trim is going to be very, very much part of the story as this month draws to an end. So there can be some exciting and interactive and playful and perhaps unpredictable elements socially or romantically at the heart of this month, but I feel that gathering of energy, particularly Saturn and Neptune in your 4th house, aligning with Pluto, is asking you to get much more clear about what you really value, but much more clear about your value and where you will be stronger about not giving away your time, affection and energy to people who may not necessarily reciprocate, not in a sinister way, because by the end of the month you're being asked to purify your situation in the best way you possibly can. Have a great month, Capricorn. Take care and goodbye. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome Aquarius, to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. At the start of April, Mercury was retrograde and Venus too. But you know, the most significant event, I feel, was not just them stationing direct. It was on the 18th, Mars bursting into your 7th house. Because Mars going through the sign of Cancer, where it's not particularly happy, and in retrograde from the 6th of January to the 24th of February, probably created quite a lot of frustration, perhaps even low physical vitality. And of course, Saturn, your traditional ruler, was applying to Venus, the planet of relating and money, right through April, and precisely on 2 occasions with exact conjunctions. So as you come into this month, Mars is still in the sign of Leo, where it loves to be. It's very powerful and charismatic there, but it helps you to punch out and connect to people in a very assertive, dynamic and charismatic way. It is still broadly in an opposition with Pluto. There may have been a tussle at the heart of April, but now you have an opportunity this month with Venus, the relator, joining your sector of everyday communications on the first day and linking brilliantly with Pluto in your sign by the end of the first week to really make a great impact when it comes to your communication and connection to others. So some of the frustrations that have dominated the first 2 or 3 months of this year can start to melt away. Also, Venus is going to forge an alliance with Neptune in Aries for the first time ever in our lifetimes, right at the start of the month and exactly on the 2nd. The way that you convey your ideas, but also the creativity and artistry of your ideas can be magnified in a higher octave way. So don't underestimate the way in which you can impact on the people that you're discussing ideas with. Equally, Pluto does go retrograde on the 4th. However, that retrograde, which goes through 5 months to the middle of October, is not going to be without some very important contacts. Usually the Pluto retrograde can be quite challenging, but this year I feel it's going to bring a lot of promise. It may mean that some of the ways that you see your situation transforming in a very individual, person-led way won't necessarily go forwards in exactly the way you imagine. But I feel that what you're going to gain because of all of its contacts will prove very, very special indeed. Now, on the 5th, Venus, which has been going in and out of the sign, obviously, of Aries, Pisces, back to Aries at the start of this month, emerges from shadow. So when it comes to communications, maybe towards someone that you're drawn to, attracted to, maybe social media wise, maybe even around something that you're publishing or that you have a passion for, things start to speed up. But at the start of this month, the Sun is in an emotional part of your situation, the 4th house. But the collective of Mercury, Venus and Neptune in the 3rd house suggest how you articulate your feelings is part of the theme right at the start of the month. Venus is going to speed up and forge a stunning alliance with Mars as this month goes on. But Mercury, the communicator, the ruler of the 2nd decan of Aquarius, moves into Taurus on the 10th of the month, and it starts to intersect in a T-square with that opposition between Mars, relationships, and you being more combative and perhaps even competitive with Pluto in your own sign. So it's suggesting don't override your emotional senses, listen to your instincts. Mercury generally finds the 4th house a bit more challenging, but it's pretty good in Taurus because it's looking for value, it's looking to make sense of things. But on the 11th, Venus steps forwards again and starts to angle fantastically well to Mars. If you are single but you'd like to meet someone, you'd like to extend your social reach, you have a brilliant chance with Venus and Mars in a fantastically collaborative relationship that peaks on the 22nd but goes on through to the end of the month. So how you express yourself, the 3rd house, your ideas, the 3rd house, your mode of communication, whether it's instant message, text, or verbally, and the way you come across can be very compelling when Venus and Mars are linking together. You can seem passionate, but also you can come across in a dazzling way. The warmth, the fire warmth that you're going to generate is going to be something to behold. But having said that, the full moon of the 12th can see your feelings very delicately close to the surface over the next couple of weeks. Juggling that classic work-life scenario may prove challenging. Your modern ruler of Uranus is providing an electric connection to the Sun through week 3 and also to the full moon, and Mercury as it inches forwards will also hit on Uranus too. So there could be surprise visitors at home. There may be some changes to your home situation that may need some reacting to. For example, some Aquarius people might decide to suddenly leave home, sell or rent out a property, vacate where they've been. Some kind of swift change around where you live is possible, or it could see you just wanting to declutter. most Aquarius people have a big appreciation of space, and Uranus can be very much about that principle. So if you do find yourself doing some spring cleaning if you're in the north, or some autumn cleaning if you're in the south, good for you, because you're using that Uranian energy well. But there could also be a surprise visitor. Someone could be in touch from your family that you're just not expecting to hear from. Maybe someone that you've had some distance from, or maybe you'll want some distance from people. If you do share a property, for example, through that heart of the month, having a bit more personal space and independence will be something that's important to you. However, the 20th is a stunning day because the sun moves into Gemini. The 5th house is about joyfulness, self-expression. It's about where you can demonstrate your flair and talent and charisma. But it's also where we can be very social. And because Saturn moves the following day into your 3rd house, if you've got ideas you want to express, Saturn in the 3rd house says that what you say, you mean, and you can get your ideas across with a lot of gravitas. So that's very exciting. They both link to Pluto. Saturn in the sextile along with Neptune. Neptune and Pluto in touch within 3 degrees the last 10 days of this month. But I feel that once Mercury joins up with the Sun in its home sign of Gemini on the 26th, that's really very exciting. Mercury in the 5th house can be playful, cheeky, mischievous. Your sense of humour will be absolutely buzzing. The new moon in Gemini can just give you such an appetite for interaction and play, particularly with Venus and Mars peaking in their trine on the 22nd. So that last 10 days of the month, which is augmented on the last day of May by a glorious Mercury cazimi, that's when the Sun and Mercury are totally aligned. They're unified. The glow, the warmth, the power of the Sun, the furnace of the Sun applying to the quick wits and essentially the potential for genius of Mercury, which is about ideas in Gemini. So your ideas can be very much more easy to express, but also you could find that other people are much more receptive to what you've got to say. So Saturn for some zodiac signs moving into Aries, where it is of course technically in its full, will struggle. But I feel for you, getting Saturn out of the 2nd house, where it may have been quite brutal in terms of your sense of self, your values, your income over the last couple of years, you're going to have a holiday for 3 months and 7 days. Enjoy every single moment of it, because Saturn is going to activate brilliantly to Pluto, but it also will activate superbly to this Sun and Mercury at the end of this month, but also to your modern ruler Uranus when it moves into Gemini from the 7th of July for 4 months. So there's a lot to look forward to over this part of the year, Aquarius. But I have to be honest, Saturn of course can be where things show up that need working at. So if you're a bit perhaps careless around your communication, or perhaps a bit reluctant to engage with learning about technology or improving your skills, or perhaps there are some tensions with neighbours or some relatives, those issues may show up for sure. But I think overwhelmingly the nuances in your picture of your chart, the big picture, are really very galvanizing as this month draws to a close. Have a great May, take care, and goodbye. Remember to check out my new website please at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more. Welcome Pisces to your in-depth monthly forecast for May 2025. Your 2 ruling planets of Jupiter and Neptune are right at the heart of the celestial action this month. Jupiter is very close to the moon at the very start of the month in your 4th house. That's very much about where we want to feel comfortable, secure and safe. Can also be around our home and family life. But they're both aligned in a challenging way to Saturn and the North Node right at the start of the month. In the case of Jupiter and the North Node, that goes on for the whole of the month. So the North Node is kind of guiding us. It's like an instinctive guide, and we're all being asked to be conscious of the value of the qualities of your sign, which is very much about being in touch with how things feel, not necessarily the more tangible side of life. But of course, stern Saturn is very much about those practicalities. So if you do feel a little conflicted right at the start of this month about a family or home issue, it wouldn't be a complete surprise. Also, if you recall, on the 18th of April, Mars, the planet of passion, moved from the charismatic 5th house into the practical 6th. And it's been pushing you since then to perhaps be a little bit more virtuous in terms of your physical well-being. But Pluto is in for a long haul through a very psychological part of your situation. So however much you've been trying to be more efficient and get on the front foot in terms of making your life that much more organised, Pluto in some ways could have been somewhat inhibiting if you feel somewhat bogged down by issues which aren't necessarily so obvious but may be very active deep within your subconscious, which is what the 12th house can be about, and Pluto can be about revelations and changes. But if you have just been feeling a bit unsure about what to do, it may be that that aspect has been part of the equation. But also Saturn, the aforementioned Saturn, had been applying to a whole pack of players in your sign for the whole of April. So you may have experienced April as being quite a frustrating month, but it's not a month that didn't have its moments of progress. And as you start this new month, the Sun, for example, is in the buzzy 3rd house, very interactive, quick communication, may have seen the speed of life pick up. Mercury, the ruler of the 3rd house, is in your 2nd, great for thinking carefully about your resources. But Venus, which rules money, has moved back from your sign into your 2nd house. If you have been waiting for some news on a financial situation and it has been delayed painfully and frustratingly, I feel by the end of the first week of this month, Venus's link to Pluto will reveal all, and the news could be better than you hope. But of course, Neptune moved into your 2nd house and Aries at the end of March, and Venus and Neptune align in the first week of this month. If you are someone who can be very generous, and that's often the case with Pisces people, around good causes, you may want to do something for one at the start of May. But equally, the 2nd house is about our sense of self-worth. And one of the things you could be tempted to do, if you are feeling a bit below par, is hit something that gives you a sense of release. Whether it is the sugar that I go for with my ice cream at night, or it is the chocolates, or it is a glass of wine. All those things are great in the right quantities. But if you're just tempted to get involved in some escapism at the start of this month, it could be a diet breaker if you have been trying to apply to one. But on the 4th, Pluto starts a backward journey which lasts through to the 14th of October. That retrograde, which is annual for 5 months, could for you be a challenge because it's in the 12th house. The 12th house could see certain parts through to 243 initially, when Pluto enters your sign briefly, and then further to 244, see parts of your existence as you know it now just falling away. It may be long associations, it could be some interest, it could be a particular role that you've fulfilled for some time, maybe it could be some friendships, because the 12th house is very much with Pluto in the mix about what no longer serves our purpose. But sometimes with Pluto, we're not conscious of what we need to release. But through to the middle of October, you will get a lot more insight into what may need to be let go. And for us all this year, Pluto's retrograde is going to be more constructive because of the links it's going to make this month when the Sun moves into the sign of Gemini on the 20th, but also because Saturn moves from your sign into your second house, but also links to Pluto, along with Neptune, your modern ruler, at the end of this month for 10 days. And in the case of Neptune and Pluto, across the signs of Aries and also Saturn to Pluto in Aquarius, this is the first time in our lifetimes. So a whole new reality is being engineered. But that link between Neptune and Venus at the start of this month and Neptune and Pluto at the end of this month tells you to tune into something that you have a phenomenal attribute around, and that is your instincts. What can go wrong is if you ignore your instincts, or perhaps at times over analyze things to the point that you don't just trust the first gut feeling you have. So let that guide you, Pisces. I think that's very important. But the energy in your second house at the start of this month can see you manifest an improvement in your finances, which can become clearer to you by the 22nd of the month. Because as Venus moves forwards on the 5th, it emerges from its post-retrograde shadow. That's another plus. But it's also then going to link with the fiery Mars in Leo. So you've got two fire positions collaborating. Venus can be about relating, desire and money. The second house can certainly have an appreciation of all those. Venus rules it. And Mars in the sixth house can see us particularly industrious. So if you work hard on something you instinctively feel is right, you could see your income or something about your situation build up and make you feel better about your sense of self-worth. But the 10th of this month does see Mercury dart into the sign of Taurus. It joins up with the Sun and the unpredictable energies of Uranus. But Mercury instantly goes into a T-square with that Mars-Pluto opposition. 6, 12, 3. Your thinking could at times be very electric from that point on, but also you could jump to some conclusions, particularly if somebody tells you something. Just be aware that Pluto in the 12th house can see malicious gossip. Mars in the 6th house can see someone being a bit picky and critical and maybe forceful. And because Pluto and Mars are not well aligned to Mercury in Taurus, it can create a lot of tension. Just be conscious of that. But from the 11th, Venus steps forwards, linking through to Mars, and that continues to build as the month goes on. But the full moon on the 12th is in your sister water sign of Scorpio. But the moon in Scorpio is in its full, so it's a weak position for the moon. But for you, it's the 9th house where you want to escape, be free, travel, but perhaps feel unfettered. On the other side of the heavens, the electric energy of the Sun is applying to Uranus. Mercury in the 3rd house too suggests if you do feel a bit on edge, the chances are that can be amped up, especially if you feel your options are in some ways limited and there's a lot of demands, perhaps to learn things, perhaps to adopt new approaches. If you're someone who's a little bit uninspired by technology or even modes of transport, somehow or another Uranus could push you to confront something that you don't really want to grapple with. There could also be an intense discussion at the heart of this month as well. The good news, however, is that once the Sun, followed by Mercury on the 20th and the 26th, move into your 4th house, moving in to occupy the same part of your chart as your traditional ruler Jupiter, the last 10 days of this month can give you an opportunity to catch your breath, take a pause, really just appraise exactly where things stand in terms of your emotional bearings, where you live, who you live with. But Saturn moving out of your sign on the 25th is something you may greatly celebrate. Just be aware that Saturn applies beyond the conjunction in a square, but also the opposition, then the square again. So Saturn's always impacting on all of us all of the time, but if we work hard enough and we're conscientious enough and disciplined enough, usually we can gain something from it. So what Saturn's been asking you to do over the last 2 years is simplify your life. Strip it down to the things that are truly important. So at the start of this month, when Saturn is in that square with the moon and Jupiter, if you're caught up too much in people pleasing around a family matter, that might not quite work for you, the individual. So as Saturn moves into the sign of Aries, for sure, for the next 3 months, you may have to become more mindful of resources, being a bit cannier, squeezing more from what you have, and it's a pattern that will be repeated from early next year for the following 2.25 years. But for now, just celebrate whatever it is you've been building up, because this is a chance to get a firmer foundation. The link back to Pluto suggests it may be that something you've worked on for a very long period of time can start to mature. The link to the Sun and Mercury could be that that gives you a great sense of personal satisfaction, especially if it's finishing a build or an upgrade on a property, redecorating, moving altogether, downsizing, adding to your family, whatever gives you a greater sense of stability. The accomplishment that you get towards the end of this month really is worth celebrating in a big way, with the new moon on the 27th, but also the Mercury cazimi as the month closes. If you do have a gathering, that gathering is likely to be with the people who really have been very much at the heart of your emotional existence, the people who really understand some of the challenges you've been through. Those solid citizens are not always the most glamorous people, they're the people who are just the most steadfast, and that is another Saturnian message. But the 4th house isn't necessarily very outgoing or dazzling, but it's very satisfying. So what comes to pass at the end of this month, if you get a firmer, more stable position in your home or family life, or your extended family, or you're standing in a place where you feel you're functioning in a way which gives you personal satisfaction, that's something to truly, truly celebrate. Have a great month, Pisces. Good luck and goodbye. Remember to check out my new website, please, at www.patrickarundell.com. You can get your free natal horoscope. It's absolutely brilliant. The big three, the ascendant, sun and the moon, but also you can find out exactly where your other planets are, the signs they're in, the houses they're in, and critically the relationships between them. You can also sign up for your free daily written horoscope. Please see below for more.